December 8, 1939. Kola, Finland. A vast silence blanketed the snow-covered forest as dawn broke across the eastern Finnish frontier. The temperature had plummeted to -40 degrees Celsius overnight, cold enough to freeze the breath of men and machines alike. In this frigid wasteland, 23-year-old Finnish Army Corporal Tauno Mäkinen huddled beside his commander, watching through binoculars as something extraordinary unfolded across the valley. What they witnessed defied 30 years of Soviet military doctrine. "Sir, it can't be just one man," Mäkinen whispered, his voice barely audible over the creaking ice in the pine trees. "No single soldier could cause this much chaos." Lieutenant Juho Korhonen lowered his binoculars slowly, his expression grave beneath his frost-covered woolen mask. "Not a soldier, Mäkinen. A farmer?" Through the crystalline winter air, they watched as 505 Soviet soldiers, an entire battalion, executed a chaotic retreat from a position they had occupied for just 16 hours. The Soviets abandoned equipment, weapons, and even their wounded as they fled from an enemy they couldn't see, locate, or understand. What these men were witnessing was the work of a single Finnish sniper, a 33-year-old dairy farmer named Simo Heiha. Standing just 5 feet 3 inches tall, with no formal military education beyond basic training, no tactical sniper instruction, and, most remarkably, no telescopic sight on his rifle, Heiha had systematically decimated the Soviet force throughout the night, picking off 78 men in the darkness. The Soviets never saw him, never found him, never understood how one man, operating in conditions that should have made combat impossible, could inflict such devastating losses. What Mäkinen saw that morning defied 23 years of Soviet military indoctrination, the belief that the Red Army was invincible, that its sheer numerical advantage would always prevail, that its soldiers were superior to all others. Instead, he was watching 505 elite Soviet troops fleeing in terror from a single Finnish farmer in white camouflage. The Winter War had begun just 12 days earlier. Already the myth of Soviet military superiority was unraveling in the frozen forests of Finland, and the legend of the White Death was being born. The Soviet Union and Finland shared a border stretching 1,200 kilometers, much of it winding through dense forests and frozen lakes. Relations between the two nations had been complex since Finland declared independence from Russia in 1917, following the Russian Revolution. For 22 years, an uneasy peace prevailed, but by 1939, Europe had descended into the early stages of World War II, and the Soviet leadership under Joseph Stalin grew increasingly concerned about Finland's strategic position. The Soviets considered Finland's proximity to Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, a security threat. The Finnish border lay just 32 kilometers from this vital Soviet city, the cradle of the Russian Revolution and the USSR's second-largest urban center. To address this perceived vulnerability, the Soviet Union demanded territorial concessions from Finland, including parts of the Karelian Isthmus. When Finland refused these demands, the stage was set for conflict. On November 30th, 1939, without a formal declaration of war, the Soviet Union launched a massive invasion of Finland. The scale of the disparity between the two forces was almost beyond comprehension. The Soviet Union deployed 1 million soldiers against Finland's army of just 300,000. The Red Army possessed 3,500 tanks, while Finland had none. Soviet artillery pieces numbered 3,200. Finland had just 534. In the air, the Soviets deployed 3,800 aircraft, whereas Finland could muster only 114. By every conventional military metric, the Winter War should have ended within days, perhaps a week at most. Soviet propaganda had ceaselessly promoted the invincibility of the Red Army, the same force that had prevailed in the Russian Civil War and had been transformed through Stalin's military modernization programs. Soviet soldiers had been taught that the Finns were weak, disorganized, and would surrender at the first sign of Soviet might. "One powerful blow and the enemy will be scattered to the winds," proclaimed a Soviet military newspaper on the first day of the invasion. Soviet commanders expected to be in Helsinki, the Finnish capital, within 12 days. Military parades were planned. Governance structures were prepared. Victory speeches were written. What they encountered instead was a catastrophe of unprecedented proportions. The Finnish forces, though vastly outnumbered and outgunned, possessed intimate knowledge of their terrain, superior winter warfare training, and an indomitable fighting spirit. None exemplified these advantages more perfectly than Simo Heiha, a humble dairy farmer from Rautjärvi in the eastern part of Finland. Born on December 17, 1905, Heiha grew up in rural Finland, where hunting was not merely recreation, but a necessary skill for survival. From childhood, he had developed extraordinary marksmanship, winning numerous local shooting competitions. His hunting experience gave him an instinctive understanding of camouflage, patience, and the art of remaining motionless for hours, skills that would prove devastatingly effective against Soviet forces. When war broke out, Heiha was 33 years old. He joined the 34th Infantry Regiment and was deployed to the Kola Front, one of the most bitterly contested sectors of the war. What distinguished Heiha from other snipers was his bewildering refusal to use a telescopic sight, even when such equipment was available to him. He preferred the standard-issue Finnish version of the Mosin Nagant rifle, the M2830, with only its iron sights. His reasoning defied conventional military wisdom, but demonstrated a profound understanding of the practical realities of winter warfare. Telescopic sights could fog or freeze in extreme cold. The glass could reflect sunlight, revealing a sniper's position, and most critically, using a scope required the sniper to raise his head higher above cover, increasing his vulnerability. Heiha's choice to use iron sights allowed him to remain lower to the ground, present a smaller target, and operate more effectively in the harsh winter conditions. Against this single Finnish farmer with his iron-sighted rifle, the Soviets deployed their 39th Army, comprising 18 divisions, approximately 140,000 men. They were equipped with the latest Soviet tanks, artillery, and aircraft. They had been assured of a swift victory. Within the first month of combat, Heiha had accumulated a confirmed kill count of over 200 Soviet soldiers, earning him the nickname Belaya Smrt, the White Death, among terrified Soviet troops. His legend grew with each passing day, as did the mounting Soviet losses in the frozen Finnish wilderness. Captain Vasily Petrov of the Soviet 122nd Infantry Division recorded in his diary on December 21st, "The men speak of a ghost in the forest, a demon who cannot be killed. We lose 15-20 men each day to this invisible enemy. Command says it is Finnish propaganda, that no single sniper could achieve such results. But I have seen the bodies. One shot, one kill. Always in the head, always from an impossible distance." The mental impact on Soviet morale was devastating. Soldiers began refusing to go on patrol. Officers reported instances of self-inflicted wounds as troops desperately sought evacuation from the Kola Front. The Soviets deployed counter-snipers, artillery barrages, and even airstrikes against areas where they believed Heiha was operating. None of it worked. The White Death continued his methodical harvest. Lieutenant Alexei Kovalev, a Soviet intelligence officer, wrote in a classified report dated January 3, 1940, "The Finnish sniper known as Belaya Smrt represents a significant psychological operation by the enemy. The impact on our forces cannot be overstated. Men believe they're being hunted by something supernatural. The statistical probability of a single sniper achieving such results without technological advantage, telescopic sights, is virtually zero, yet the evidence suggests this is exactly what is happening. We must consider the possibility that conventional tactics are ineffective in this environment." The journey of discovery for Soviet forces in Finland was both brutal and illuminating. As the Winter War progressed, the invading Red Army was forced to confront a series of shocking realizations that contradicted everything they had been taught about their own military superiority and the nature of their Finnish enemy. Major Dmitry Yuryevich Sokolov of the Soviet 4th Tank Brigade recorded his disbelief in a letter to his commander on January 7, 1940. "We were told the Finns would run at the sight of our armor. Instead, they approach our tanks without fear, immobilize them with logs jammed into the tracks, then destroy them with Molotov cocktails. Yesterday, we lost 7 T-26 tanks to farmers with bottles of gasoline. How do I explain this to Moscow?" The Soviet military had entered Finland with absolute confidence in their technological superiority. Their T-26 light tanks and T-28 medium tanks were considered advanced machines of war. Yet in the dense Finnish forests, on narrow roads hemmed in by deep snow, these mechanical behemoths became vulnerable targets for Finnish soldiers using improvised anti-tank methods. Captain Ivan Nikolaevich Baranov, a company commander in the Soviet 44th Motorized Division, described his growing realization: "Our tanks are useless in this terrain. We lose 3 to 5 machines daily. The Finns know every tree, every rock. They wait until our column is stretched thin, then attack the lead and rear vehicles simultaneously. The tanks in between cannot maneuver off the narrow roads because of the deep snow. They become nothing more than expensive metal coffins." By mid-January 1940, the Soviets had lost over 300 tanks, nearly 10% of their initial invasion force of mechanized armor. Finnish soldiers, many of whom were simple farmers like Heha, had neutralized machines that cost 20 times their annual income, using nothing more than bottles filled with gasoline and tar. But perhaps the most profound journey of discovery came in understanding the psychological character of their Finnish adversaries. The Soviet propaganda had portrayed Finns as soft, Western-influenced, and lacking revolutionary fervor. What they encountered was something entirely different, an enemy perfectly adapted to conditions the Soviets found unbearable. Private Mikhail Petrovich Leonov of the Soviet 22nd Rifle Division wrote in his journal on January 15th, "They move through the snow like ghosts. I saw a Finnish patrol today, 8 men in white camouflage gliding through the forest on those wooden skis they all seem to master. Our entire platoon opened fire. We hit nothing but trees. Then, 3 hours later, when we had forgotten about the encounter, they struck our camp from 3 directions simultaneously, 17 dead, 11 wounded. They disappeared before our machine guns could be brought to bear. How do we fight such men?" The contrast in winter warfare capabilities was stark. Most Soviet soldiers came from southern regions of the USSR and had little experience with extreme cold. Many arrived at the front without proper winter clothing. Finnish troops, in contrast, had grown up in these conditions. They moved on skis, constructed shelters from snow and branches, and maintained their weapons in conditions that rendered Soviet rifles inoperable. Lieutenant Pavel Sergeyevich Morozov, a Soviet medical officer, recorded on January 23rd, "Frostbite claims more of our men than Finnish bullets. Yesterday I amputated 27 fingers and 9 toes. The men were not issued proper gloves or boots. Meanwhile, we capture Finnish soldiers wearing layered clothing perfectly adapted to these conditions. They carry reindeer hide sleeping bags that keep them warm in temperatures that kill our soldiers overnight." Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the Winter War was the transformative effect of Simo Häyhä on Soviet military thinking. As his kill count continued to rise, eventually reaching 542 confirmed kills in less than 100 days, Soviet commanders were forced to reconsider their entire approach to warfare in winter conditions. Colonel Semyon Ivanovich Govorov, commander of the Soviet 18th Division, issued a tactical directive on February 2, 1940. All units must assume Finnish snipers are present in any forested area. No fires are to be lit during daylight. Officers will remove rank insignia and distinctive uniform elements. Movement must be conducted in short bursts with maximum dispersion. Any suspected sniper position must be subject to immediate artillery barrage without waiting for command authorization. The directive represented a complete reversal of Soviet military doctrine, which had previously emphasized massed formations and strict hierarchical command structures. Now, entire battle plans were being reconfigured around the activities of a single Finnish dairy farmer. For Soviet soldiers who had been raised on tales of Red Army invincibility, the reality of the Finnish forest was almost impossible to reconcile with their ideological training. Private Leonid Kuznetsov of the Soviet 44th Division wrote to his sister on February 8th, "We were told we would be greeted as liberators, that the Finnish workers would join us against their bourgeois masters. Instead, every Finn we encounter, young or old, man or woman, tries to kill us. Yesterday, a boy no more than 14 years old lured 3 of our men into an ambush. All 3 died. The boy escaped on skis, moving faster than our best runners could follow through the snow." As the Soviet casualties mounted, eventually reaching 26,600 killed in action, the myth of the White Death grew to almost supernatural proportions. Some Soviet units reported refusing to enter areas where Heha was believed to operate. Others conducted elaborate rituals they believed would protect them from his bullets. Senior Lieutenant Konstantin Pavlovich Smirnov, a political officer with the Soviet 12th Division, reported, "The men have begun to carve primitive amulets they believe will ward off the White Death. This superstitious behavior is unacceptable in Red Army soldiers and represents counter-revolutionary thinking. However, attempts to confiscate these items have resulted in near-mutiny conditions." The psychological impact of the Finnish sniper has reached levels that threaten unit cohesion and combat effectiveness. The overwhelming evidence of Finnish superiority in winter warfare became impossible for the Soviet High Command to ignore. As February 1940 progressed, the Red Army's losses continued to mount, with no significant territorial gains to show for the sacrifice. In the Kola sector, where Simo Häyhä operated, Soviet forces made virtually no progress despite committing over 50,000 troops to an area less than 20 kilometers wide. The statistical evidence was devastating. Soviet documents captured by Finnish forces revealed that in the Kola sector alone, the Red Army was losing an average of 122 men per day, while Finnish casualties averaged just 14. For every Finnish soldier killed, the Soviets were losing nearly 9 men, a rate of attrition that was unsustainable even for the numerically superior Red Army. Major Andrei Kuznetsov of Soviet military intelligence compiled a report on February 20th that laid bare the brutal mathematics. In 78 days of combat operations, we have suffered approximately 9,500 casualties in the Kola sector. Finnish prisoners report their total strength in this area has never exceeded 1,500 men. This represents a kill ratio of 6-to-1 against forces with superior numbers, armor, artillery, and air support. The only significant advantage demonstrated by Finnish forces is their adaptation to winter conditions and terrain. The disparity in equipment losses was equally shocking. By mid-February, the Soviets had lost over 400 tanks and armored vehicles in the Kola sector alone. Finnish forces had no tanks or armored vehicles to lose. Soviet air losses totaled 117 aircraft, while the Finnish Air Force, which rarely ventured over the Kola front, lost only 4 planes in the same area. But perhaps the most devastating statistic concerned the impact of a single Finnish sniper. By February 25th, Simo Häyhä's confirmed kill count had reached 459 Soviet soldiers. This meant that one Finnish farmer was personally responsible for almost 5% of all Soviet casualties in the Kola sector, a statistic so improbable that several Soviet intelligence officers who reported it were accused of spreading Finnish propaganda. Colonel Ivan Petrovich Belov, a Soviet artillery commander, wrote in his operational assessment, "The Finnish sniper known as the White Death has caused more disruption to our operations than entire Finnish battalions. We have expended over 15,000 artillery shells in attempts to neutralize this single individual. The expenditure represents approximately 133 shells per Finnish soldier in the Kola sector, yet we have achieved minimal effect. The cost-effectiveness ratio is catastrophically negative. The material wastage extended beyond combat losses. Soviet supply records indicated that for every 10 tons of ammunition delivered to the front, less than 3 tons were effectively employed against the enemy. The remainder was lost to poor transportation, improper storage in winter conditions, or ineffective use against phantom targets. Lieutenant Colonel Mikhail Fedorovich Tarasov, a logistics officer with the Soviet 7th Army, reported on March 1st, "Our supply situation has become critical. The narrow roads, destroyed bridges, and constant Finnish raids have reduced delivery efficiency to below 30%. Meanwhile, captured Finnish supply depots reveal remarkably efficient systems. Their ammunition is stored in waterproof containers. Their food rations are designed for extreme cold. Even their medical supplies include specialized treatments for cold weather injuries that our field hospitals lack. We are learning bitter lessons about winter warfare at tremendous cost." Perhaps most shocking to the Soviet High Command was the discovery that Finnish soldiers were actually gaining weight during the campaign, while Soviet troops were suffering from malnutrition despite receiving theoretically larger rations. Investigation revealed that Finnish field kitchens had developed specialized equipment and techniques for cooking in temperatures below -30 degrees Celsius, while Soviet field kitchens often fail to function at all in such conditions. Captain Sergei Mikhailovich Kirov, a Soviet medical officer, documented the physical disparity. Examination of 52 Finnish prisoners captured last week revealed an average weight of 73 kilograms. Our own troops in comparable roles average 66 kilograms and show signs of significant nutritional deficiency. Finnish prisoners report receiving hot meals twice daily, even in forward positions. Our men are subsisting on frozen rations that provide inadequate caloric intake for operations in these temperatures. The evidence of Finnish adaptation to winter conditions extended to their weapons. While Soviet rifles frequently jammed due to the extreme cold and lubricating oils that congealed in sub-zero temperatures, Finnish soldiers had developed techniques to keep their weapons operational. Simo Häyhä was known to keep snow in his mouth while shooting, so his breath wouldn't create a visible vapor cloud that might reveal his position. He also placed snow on the ground in front of his firing position to prevent powder snow from rising when he fired and giving away his location. Major Leonid Ivanovich Sorokin, a Soviet weapons specialist, wrote in his assessment, "Finnish rifles captured in the Kola sector show evidence of specialized cold weather modifications. Their lubricants remain functional at temperatures that render our standard mixtures solid. Their ammunition is stored in waterproof containers that prevent moisture from affecting powder performance. Most remarkably, their snipers have developed techniques for preventing scope fogging that our own marksmen have been unable to replicate." The simplicity and effectiveness of these adaptations suggest a profound understanding of winter warfare fundamentals that our forces currently lack. As February turned to March, the overwhelming evidence of Finnish tactical superiority forced a fundamental reassessment at the highest levels of Soviet military leadership. The myth of Red Army invincibility had been shattered in the snowy forests of Kola, and the architect of this devastating reality was a 5'3" dairy farmer named Simo Häyhä. On March 6, 1940, an event occurred that would enter the mythology of the Winter War. After 98 days of combat, during which he had killed 542 Soviet soldiers with his rifle and an additional 200 with his Suomi submachine gun, Simo Häyhä was finally struck by an explosive bullet fired by a Soviet countersniper. The round hit him in the left lower jaw, destroying a significant portion of his face. Finnish Corporal Tauno Mäkinen, who had witnessed Häyhä's operations from the beginning of the war, recorded, "We thought he was dead when they brought him in. Half his face was missing. But somehow, his heart kept beating. The medics said it was impossible for a man to survive such a wound in these conditions, with the nearest field hospital 20 kilometers away. But they didn't understand who they were dealing with. This was the White Death. He had decided not to die, so death had to respect his wishes. Against all medical expectations, Haiha survived. He would remain unconscious for 11 days, waking on March 17th, the day peace was signed between Finland and the Soviet Union. When asked later about his extraordinary accomplishments during the war, Haiha responded with characteristic Finnish brevity, "I did what I was told to do as well as I could." The Winter War officially ended on March 13, 1940. Despite committing over 1 million men to the campaign, despite a numerical superiority of 3-1 in personnel and a much greater advantage in heavy weapons, despite deploying some of their best divisions, the Soviet Union had failed to conquer Finland. Instead, they were forced to accept a negotiated peace that, while granting them some territorial concessions, fell far short of their original objectives. The human cost was staggering. The Soviet Union lost approximately 126,000 men killed in action, with another 264,000 wounded and over 5,000 captured. Finnish casualties totaled around 25,000 killed and 43,000 wounded, still devastating for a small nation, but resulting in a kill ratio of 5-1 in Finland's favor. For Soviet military leadership, the psychological transformation was profound. The Winter War represented their first exposure to the reality that numerical and technological superiority did not automatically translate to battlefield success. The myth of Soviet invincibility had been shattered, replaced by a new understanding of the importance of adaptation, training, and morale. Major General Dmitry Nikolaevich Grigoriev, who had commanded Soviet forces in the northern sector, wrote in his post-war assessment, "We entered this conflict with complete confidence in our superiority in every aspect of military science. We leave it with the humbling recognition that a smaller force, properly trained and adapted to its environment, can neutralize advantages in numbers and equipment. The lessons of the Finnish campaign must be integrated into our doctrine immediately, or we risk similar failures in future conflicts." The Soviet Union would indeed implement significant reforms based on their Finnish experience. Winter warfare training was expanded, cold weather equipment was redesigned. Tactical doctrine was revised to emphasize small unit actions in forest terrain. When Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, these hard-learned lessons would prove crucial to Soviet resistance and eventual victory. For the men who had faced Simo Häyhä and survived, the psychological impact was lifelong. Sergeant Ivan Alexeyevich Danilov, who had served in the Soviet 44th Division in the Kolyma sector, wrote in his memoirs published in 1968, "I never saw him. None of us did. But we all felt his presence every minute of every day. You would be talking to a comrade, and suddenly his head would explode. No sound of a shot, no flash, nothing but death arriving from nowhere. We began to feel we were not fighting men, but some ancient Finnish forest spirit that could not be killed by mortal weapons." Even now, 28 years later, I sometimes wake up sweating, convinced the White Death is watching me through my bedroom window. The story of Simo Häyhä and the Winter War reveals a timeless truth about human conflict, that spirit, skill, and adaptation can overcome seemingly insurmountable material advantages. It demonstrates how propaganda and ideology can create dangerous overconfidence, leading to catastrophic misjudgments on the battlefield. Lieutenant Yuri Petrovich Vladimirov, a Soviet infantry officer who survived the Kola front, perhaps summarized it best in a letter to his family written after the war. "We were not defeated by the Finnish army. We were defeated by Finland itself, by its forests and lakes, its snow and ice, its stubborn people who refused to understand. They were supposed to lose. And we were defeated most of all by a farmer who killed more than 500 of us without even using a telescopic sight." How do you explain such a thing? How do you fit it into any theory of modern warfare? You cannot. You can only learn from it or perish. The legacy of Simoheha and the Winter War extends far beyond the immediate historical moment. Military academies around the world now study the conflict as a classic example of how a smaller, well-prepared force can effectively resist a numerically superior invader. The Finnish defensive strategies, particularly their use of ski troops, their understanding of forest warfare, and their ability to operate in extreme cold, have influenced military doctrine for generations. For the Soviet Union, the Winter War exposed critical weaknesses just before they faced the greatest challenge in their history, the Nazi invasion of 1941. The hard lessons learned in Finland allowed for crucial reforms that would eventually contribute to Soviet victory in World War II. In this sense, Simo-Häyhä and his fellow Finnish soldiers may have inadvertently helped save the very nation they had fought against. Häyhä himself never sought fame or recognition. After recovering from his devastating facial wound, he returned to his farm and lived a quiet life. Despite offers to write memoirs or participate in documentaries, he largely avoided publicity. When asked in a rare 1998 interview about his extraordinary wartime record, the then 93-year-old Häyhä replied simply, "I only did my duty and what I was told to do as well as I could." He died on April 1, 2002, at the age of 96, having survived the very conflict that made him a legend. Finland honors him as a national hero, while his techniques and methods continue to influence military sniping doctrine worldwide. Perhaps the most profound legacy of the White Death is the reminder that human determination, skill, and courage cannot be quantified in military planning. The Soviet forces in 1939 had calculated victory based on numbers of tanks, planes, and artillery pieces. They failed to account for the immeasurable quality of the individual Finnish soldier, and particularly for the deadly skill of a humble dairy farmer who would become the most successful sniper in recorded military history. As modern military forces increasingly rely on technological advantages and overwhelming firepower, the story of Simo-Häyhä stands as a powerful counterpoint, a reminder that the human element in warfare remains paramount, and that one exceptional individual can sometimes change the course of history. 505 Soviet soldiers never understood how a lone Finnish marksman managed to defeat them in temperatures of negative 40 degrees Celsius without a telescopic sight. But in failing to understand Simo-Häyhä, the White Death, they inadvertently provided one of history's most compelling lessons in the true nature of warfare, that victory does not always go to the strongest or most numerous, but often to those who best understand their environment, their weapons, and themselves.